This session is part of a series on St. Joseph, the foster father of Jesus and the husband of the Blessed Virgin Mary. In spite of the fact that he played such a significant role in the lives of Mary and Jesus, we know relatively little about St. Joseph. For example, we don't even know when he died. We assume he died before the public ministry of Jesus, because in Mark's Gospel, some people speak about Jesus, the son of Mary, something you'd never say if the father of the young man were still alive. But other than that, we don't have a lot of information. We do know he worked as a carpenter. Now, in our modern world, carpenter is really not so bad of a profession. But in the ancient world, carpenter meant that in the past, your family had lost their land. Therefore, you had to eke out a living with this artisanal practice. So he is a relatively poor man. We know that he's betrothed to Mary. Now, betrothed means that they were engaged, but in those times, engaged meant a lot more than it does today. It was basically that they were already married. They just weren't living together yet. And why would there be a period between the engagement and the marriage? To take care of all the things that were needed for the wedding and for the marriage. The linens, things like that, but also the meal that has to host an entire village. I remember when one of my Croatian friends said that he was going to have his first Mass in June. And I said, why June? Why are you waiting so long? And he said, we have to wait for the pigs to get fat. Because like the time of Jesus, they were expected to host the entire village. And so Joseph and Mary are engaged. We also know that Joseph belonged to the tribe of Judah. How do we know that? Because the genealogies that we find in Matthew and in Luke both state that. Now, genealogies in the ancient world were not always exact lists of generations. In fact, if we look at Matthew's list, he drops out several generations because he wants to get to the number 14 3 times. So he sort of cheats on the list. What was important about these genealogies is that they tell us a significant fact about the person. In Matthew's case, that he's a descendant of Abraham, but also that he's 3 times better than David. In Luke's case, that he's a descendant of Adam and Eve. Therefore, he has come for all people on the earth. In spite of the fact that these two genealogies are quite different, they nevertheless include the fact that King David was an ancestor of Joseph. Now, we have to say one thing about this. These are genealogies of Joseph, not of Mary. So how do we know that Jesus was a descendant of King David? Because remember, Mary is the mother, but God the Father is the father. So how do we know that Mary was the tribe of Judah? First of all, you tended to marry within tribes. Second, you married a close relative. Very often the rabbis would say, a perfect marriage is an uncle marrying a niece. Now that's a little bit creepy for us, but in ancient times, the idea was to keep the land within the family. And so Mary would have been a second cousin of Joseph, and they would have had basically the same genealogy. But what else do we know about Joseph? Relatively little. In fact, he never speaks in the Gospels. Never once. He performs a silent, faithful task of caring for Mary and caring for Jesus. He does his work every day without complaining, without bragging, without calling attention to himself. And isn't that a wonderful model for us? That instead of trying to get everybody to see what we're doing, especially in this time when people are famous because they're famous, they have no real tasks that they've done on their own to gain their fame. In times like this, to realize that simply going to work every day, taking care of my family, doing what is needed is already a great service. And I think St. Joseph can be a great model for us of that quiet, faithful service that never calls attention to itself, but certainly offers itself as an act of love.